The sun hung low in the sky, its golden rays barely cutting through the dense clouds that loomed over the barren land. A dry wind howled, carrying with it the scent of dust and decay. The earth was cracked, parched, as if it too had been abandoned. Among the desolation, a lone figure stumbled across the jagged landscape, his silhouette barely visible against the fading light. His steps were slow and deliberate, each one marked with a painful grimace. His clothes were torn, his body bruised, and his face, once full of life, was now hollowed by exhaustion and despair. This was no ordinary man. He was a warrior, a hero in his time, trusted by kings, revered by comrades. Yet here he was, abandoned to die, left to rot in the merciless wilderness. His name was Aiden. Aiden had been cast out of his kingdom by those he had once fought for. His crime? Betrayal. Or so they said. The whispers that filled the cold stone halls of the palace were enough to condemn him. He was accused of treason, of plotting against the very people he had vowed to protect. But those who knew him knew it was all a lie, a twisted story woven by those with power. It didn't matter now. They had sentenced him to death, and now he was alone, exiled to die in the wilderness, forgotten by the world. The betrayal weighed heavily on his heart. A man who had once stood tall, who had commanded respect, was now reduced to a mere shadow of himself. He had lost everything: the loyalty of his comrades, the trust of his king, and the love of the people. But what stung the most was the fact that he had been betrayed by those he had called family. His best friend, his closest ally, had been the one to deliver the final blow. "We cannot trust him anymore," his friend had said in the council meeting, the words cutting deeper than any sword could. "He is a liability, a danger to us all." And just like that, Aiden had been cast out, his fate sealed with a single sentence: exile. Death. It had been days since they left him there, and yet the bitter taste of betrayal still lingered in his mouth. The world around him was silent, save for the rustling of the wind and the occasional crack of a distant thunderstorm. His body ached from the journey, each step growing harder than the last. His wounds, untreated and raw, throbbed with an intensity that made him want to scream, but he held it in. He had to keep moving. He couldn't afford to stop. He was dying. Slowly, painfully, he could feel his strength draining with every step. His throat was dry, his lips cracked, and the hunger gnawed at his insides. But he couldn't give in. Not yet. There was something deep inside him, a flicker of defiance that refused to die with him in this forsaken land. He had survived worse, hadn't he? He wasn't going to let them win. Not like this. As he moved forward, his eyes caught something in the distance, a shadow moving against the backdrop of the barren landscape. It was just a flicker at first, but as he squinted, he realized it was something large, something alive. His heart skipped a beat. Was it another person? Another exiled soul, lost in this wasteland like him? Or perhaps a beast, prowling for prey? Aiden's pace quickened, though he didn't have much energy left to spare. His hands, trembling from exhaustion, gripped the hilt of his sword, though he knew it was useless. He could barely hold it upright, let alone wield it in battle. But it was all he had left. The shadow moved closer, and Aiden could now make out its form. It wasn't human. It wasn't even an animal he recognized. It was massive, towering over him, with long, twisted limbs and glowing eyes that pierced through the darkness. A creature of the wilderness, one that had been lurking in the forgotten corners of the world, waiting for its next victim. Fear gripped him, but there was something else too: curiosity. A strange sense of familiarity, like the creature was not just a monster, but something more. Something he could not place. He stumbled forward, desperate to know what this creature was, or perhaps what it could offer him. The creature stopped moving, its eyes locking onto his with an unnerving calmness. Aiden's breath caught in his throat as he slowly lowered his sword, unsure of what to do next. He was so weak, so close to death, that he wondered if the creature was simply waiting for him to die. It would be an easy end. He would never have to face the shame of his exile or the weight of his failure. But something inside him refused to give in to that idea. He couldn't die here. Not like this. "Who are you?" he whispered hoarsely, his voice barely audible over the wind. The creature didn't answer, but it didn't need to. Its very presence spoke volumes. It was ancient, powerful, and it had seen countless generations come and go. And now, it was here, watching him. Aiden took a shaky step forward. He was no longer sure if it was fear or something else that urged him on. Perhaps it was desperation. Perhaps it was the need for a reason to survive. Whatever it was, he kept moving toward the creature, his heart pounding in his chest. Without warning, the creature moved. It was faster than anything he had ever seen, its form a blur as it crossed the distance between them in an instant. Aiden's breath hitched as it stood before him, towering over him like a mountain. He could feel the heat radiating from its body, the power contained within its every muscle. But instead of attacking, the creature lowered its head, its glowing eyes still locked onto his. It was as if it was studying him, waiting for something. Aiden didn't know what to do. He couldn't fight. He couldn't even stand properly. His body had failed him. But somehow, in that moment, something shifted. A connection, fragile but undeniable, seemed to form between them. The creature wasn't an enemy. It wasn't a threat. It was something else, something more. He took a slow, cautious step closer, his heart racing. The creature didn't move, didn't flinch. It simply watched him, its eyes deep, like they contained the very soul of the earth itself. Aiden reached out a trembling hand, his fingers brushing against the rough texture of the creature's scales. The contact sent a strange sensation through his body, a jolt of energy, as if the creature was somehow giving him its strength. For the first time since his exile, Aiden felt something he hadn't felt in days. Hope. The wind howled around them, the world silent except for the sound of his breathing and the creature's low growl. Aiden didn't know what would happen next. He didn't know if he would survive or die here, with this creature at his side. But one thing was certain. This creature, whatever it was, had chosen him. And that, in itself, was enough to keep him going. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Aiden stood there, with the creature by his side, ready to face whatever the wilderness had in store for him. He had been cast out to die, but he had found something that could change everything. This was just the beginning. The moon had risen high into the sky, casting pale, silvery light over the barren landscape. Aiden stood still, his eyes locked onto the creature before him. The air around them was thick with tension, as if the very earth was holding its breath. The beast remained motionless, its glowing eyes never leaving Aiden's face. He could feel its power, raw and untamed, radiating from its massive form. He had never seen anything like it. This creature was a force of nature, something beyond his understanding. But despite its intimidating presence, Aiden didn't feel fear. Instead, he felt something else, something he hadn't felt in days. Hope. The wind blew cold against his skin as Aiden took a cautious step closer to the creature. His legs were still weak from the journey, but there was something about the beast that gave him strength, something about its presence that made him feel less alone, less abandoned. For the first time since his exile, Aiden felt as though he wasn't completely powerless. "Are you real?" Aiden whispered under his breath, half expecting the creature to vanish into the darkness. But the creature didn't disappear. It was very real, standing tall and solid before him, its massive form looming like a shadow. The creature blinked slowly, its gaze never wavering. Aiden took another step forward, his heart pounding in his chest. He felt a strange connection to the creature, as if it too had been cast aside, left to rot in this unforgiving land. Maybe that was why they were both here, both abandoned, both surviving against all odds. But the bond that was forming between them went beyond survival. It was something deeper, something that Aiden couldn't quite explain. Tentatively, He reached out again, this time with more confidence. His fingers brushed against the creature's scales, feeling the rough texture under his touch. The creature did not flinch, did not move away. Instead, it let out a low, rumbling growl, almost as if it were purring. Aiden froze for a moment, unsure of what to make of this strange reaction. The creature seemed to respond to him in a way that no animal or human ever had. It wasn't just a beast, it was something more, something ancient and wise. Aiden stepped back, his mind racing. What was this creature? How had it come to be here, in this forsaken place? He didn't have answers, but one thing was certain. This creature had chosen him. And Aiden, for reasons he couldn't understand, had accepted it. Days passed, and Aiden's bond with the creature only deepened. At first, he had been hesitant, unsure of how to interact with it. But as time went on, he found himself relying on the creature more and more. It was a protector, a companion, and a source of strength that he never expected to find in the wilderness. The creature, which Aiden had initially feared, began to show signs of intelligence and understanding. It wasn't just a wild animal. It was as if the creature knew Aiden's pain, knew his suffering, and was willing to help him in ways that were beyond comprehension. It helped him find food and water, leading him to hidden streams and groves where he could drink and gather sustenance. At times, it would stand guard while Aiden slept, its glowing eyes scanning the horizon for any signs of danger. Aiden could sense the creature's loyalty growing, and he found himself opening up to it. In the stillness of the night, as they sat together by a crackling fire, Aiden would speak to the creature. He would tell it about the kingdom he had come from, the betrayal that had led to his exile, and the pain that he had carried in his heart. He didn't expect the creature to understand, but somehow it felt comforting to share his story, to release the weight that had been crushing him for so long. The creature would listen, its glowing eyes never leaving his face, and every so often, it would respond with a low growl or a soft grunt, as though it understood, as though it were comforting him in its own way. One day, as they trekked through the wilderness, Aiden noticed something unusual. The creature was moving with purpose, its head held high and its steps confident. It was as though it was guiding him, leading him toward something. Aiden followed, unsure of where they were going, but trusting the creature completely. After several hours of walking, they arrived at the edge of a dense forest. The trees were tall and thick, their branches reaching out like arms, casting long shadows over the ground. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, and Aiden felt an unsettling chill crawl down his spine. There was something about this place, something ancient, as if the forest held secrets that had been hidden for centuries. The creature stopped at the edge of the forest, turning to face Aiden. Its eyes were glowing brighter now, more intensely, and Aiden could sense that it was trying to communicate with him. He took a step forward, his heart racing. He didn't know what lay beyond the forest, but he felt drawn to it, as though it were calling him. "Are we going in there?" Aiden asked, his voice hoarse from days of thirst and exhaustion. The creature gave a low growl, then began to move into the forest, its massive form disappearing into the shadows. Aiden hesitated for a moment, but then, trusting the creature completely, he followed. The forest was dense, the air thick with the scent of pine and earth. The trees seemed to close in around him, their twisted branches blocking out most of the light. As he moved deeper into the forest, Aiden could feel a strange energy in the air, a sense of power that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. The creature led him to a clearing in the center of the forest, where a large ancient stone lay. It was covered in moss and vines, but Aiden could make out strange symbols etched into its surface. The symbols seemed familiar, though he couldn't quite place them. There was something ancient about this place, something that spoke of forgotten rituals and lost knowledge. The creature stopped in front of the stone, its eyes glowing with a strange intensity. Aiden stood beside it, his breath shallow as he took in the scene. He didn't know what was happening, but he could feel that this moment was significant. It was as if the creature had brought him here for a reason. Aiden knelt beside the stone, running his fingers over the ancient symbols. They seemed to pulse under his touch, as though they were alive, responding to his presence. Suddenly, a deep rumble filled the air, and the ground beneath them trembled. Aiden's heart skipped a beat, and he stood quickly, looking around for signs of danger. But there was no danger. The rumbling grew louder, and the creature let out a roar, a deep, guttural sound that seemed to echo through the forest. Aiden's breath caught in his throat as he realized what was happening. The creature wasn't just a beast. It was a guardian, a protector of this place, and somehow it had chosen him as its companion. The ground continued to shake, and the symbols on the stone began to glow brighter, casting an eerie light across the clearing. Aiden stood in awe, watching as the ancient power of the forest seemed to awaken around him. This was more than a bond between a man and a beast. It was a connection between two souls, two beings from different worlds, brought together by fate. And together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. As the rumbling subsided, the creature turned to Aiden, its glowing eyes meeting his. There was a sense of understanding, of a shared purpose between them. Aiden didn't need words to understand what the creature was telling him. He was no longer alone. He had a purpose, and he had a powerful ally at his side. The creature had awakened, and so had Aiden's fate. The days of wandering were behind them. The wilderness that had once seemed endless now felt like a memory, a distant nightmare. Aiden stood at the edge of the forest, his heart pounding in his chest. Beside him, the creature loomed, its glowing eyes scanning the horizon. It was no longer just a companion. It had become his ally, his protector, the force that had kept him alive in this harsh world. And now, they were about to return to the place that had abandoned him, the place that had sentenced him to death. Aiden's eyes narrowed as he gazed toward the "Tell your king that I've returned," Aiden said, his voice a low growl. "Tell him I've come for justice." With a final, menacing glance at the guards, Aiden turned and walked past them, the creature following closely behind. The guards were too stunned to move, too shocked by the sheer presence of the beast that had appeared at their gates. They had never seen anything like it. Aiden walked through the streets of the kingdom, the creature at his side, the people parting before him as if they could feel the storm that was coming. Whispers filled the air, people staring at him in awe and fear. Word of his return would spread quickly. They would remember the man they had cast aside, the man who had been left to die. But now he was back, and he was no longer the broken man they had exiled. As Aiden neared the palace, his thoughts turned to the king. He had been the one who had ordered Aiden's exile, the one who had condemned him without a second thought. The king had been his closest friend, the one person Aiden had trusted above all others. But that trust had been shattered when the king had betrayed him, throwing him to the wolves for political gain. The palace stood before him now, its towering spires reaching toward the sky. It was a symbol of power, of wealth, of the very thing that had cost Aiden everything. But it was also a place of weakness. The kingdom was crumbling, its rulers blind to the truth. They had allowed corruption to seep into their hearts, and Aiden had been a casualty of their greed. He would make them see the truth. He would make them regret the day they had cast him out. The palace doors opened before him, the guards standing aside in fear. They had been warned, and they knew better than to try and stop him. Aiden had once been a hero, and though they had turned their backs on him, they still remembered the man he had been. The beast at his side only amplified the legend that surrounded him. Inside the grand hall, the king sat on his throne, a proud and regal figure, though there was a nervousness in his eyes as Aiden approached. The once dignified ruler now looked like a man who had spent too many years clinging to his power, afraid of losing it. "Aiden," the king said, his voice filled with uncertainty. "I never thought I'd see you again." "You shouldn't have," Aiden replied, his voice cold. "But here I am, and I've come to take back what you stole from me." The king's expression faltered, a flicker of fear crossing his face. "I had no choice," he stammered. "You betrayed me. You betrayed the kingdom. The people, they didn't trust you anymore. I had to protect them." "Protect them." Aiden's voice was sharp, cutting through the air like a blade. "You abandoned me to die in the wilds. You turned your back on everything we had fought for. You condemned me for a crime I didn't commit." The king's face twisted in anger. "You were a threat to my throne. You were a liability." Aiden stepped closer, his fists clenched. "I wasn't a liability. I was your brother. I fought for you. And this is how you repay me." The creature beside him let out a low growl, its massive form looming ominously. It was a silent reminder of the power that Aiden now commanded. The king's fear was palpable as he shifted uneasily in his seat. "I'm not here for power or revenge," Aiden said, his voice steady, though filled with a quiet rage. "I'm here to make things right. You've turned this kingdom into a shadow of what it once was. The people suffer because of your greed, and I won't let that continue." Aiden turned his gaze toward the crowd of nobles and courtiers who had gathered, watching the confrontation unfold. "This kingdom is broken, and it's time for a change." Without another word, Aiden stepped forward, his eyes locking onto the king. He had made his decision. This wasn't just about vengeance. It was about justice. It was about redemption. The king may have exiled him, but now it was time for Aiden to reclaim what was rightfully his. The cold, imposing walls of the palace felt like a prison to Aiden now. The grandeur that had once filled him with pride now only served to remind him of the betrayal that had begun within these very walls. His heart beat like a drum in his chest, loud and unrelenting as he faced the king on the throne. The creature stood by his side, a silent, ever-watchful guardian, its eyes glowing with an ancient fire that seemed to hum in tune with Aiden's own pulse. The beast had become more than just a companion. It had become an extension of his will, a manifestation of the strength he had found deep within himself after all these months of survival and suffering. The room was heavy with tension. The air was thick with the fear of those who had gathered to witness the confrontation, their eyes darting between Aiden and the king. They had never seen him like this, not the broken man they had cast aside, but a force to be reckoned with. And the creature at his side only amplified that power. "You should have never abandoned me, Father," Aiden said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. His words were soft, but they carried a weight that none in the room could ignore. The king flinched, his eyes widening with disbelief. "Aiden, you've lost your mind. You've turned into a monster. What happened to you? What happened to me?" Aiden's voice trembled with a mix of rage and sorrow. "You betrayed me. You condemned me to die. You chose power over family. You forgot the very reason I fought for you in the first place. All I ever wanted was to protect this kingdom." The king rose from his throne, his movements stiff with age and arrogance. His hands were trembling, and his eyes flicked nervously to the creature beside Aiden. The beast's presence was unnerving, and it seemed to loom larger the closer the king came. "You think you can come back and take what is mine? You think you can just waltz in here after everything you've done? You're nothing but a traitor, Aiden." The king spat, his voice rising with anger. "You're no hero. You're nothing." Aiden's expression hardened, and he stepped closer to the king, his eyes burning with a fire that could not be extinguished. "I may have been exiled, abandoned, and left to die, but I am not nothing. I am everything you failed to see in me. I am the man who once fought beside you. And now, I am the one who will make sure that this kingdom does not fall into the hands of those who would destroy it." The creature growled low at Aiden's side, sensing the intensity of the moment. It was a warning, a reminder that they had power on their side. Aiden did not need to speak for the beast to make its presence known. It was a force of nature, a symbol of survival, loyalty, and strength. And now it stood beside Aiden, not just as an ally, but as a manifestation of everything he had become during his exile. The king's gaze faltered for a moment, his eyes flitting between Aiden and the creature. The people in the room, too, seemed to feel the weight of what was happening. Aiden had come back with more than just revenge in his heart. He had come back with the strength to reclaim his honor, to rebuild what had been shattered. He had come back with the power to rewrite the story of his betrayal. "You are nothing but a relic of the past, Aiden," the king hissed, his voice shaky with desperation. "You think you can change anything now? The people have already made their choice. They want power, they want safety, and they want strength. I give them that. You're weak. You've always been weak." Aiden felt a cold fury rise within him, but he held it in check. There was no need to waste words on the king any longer. Words had failed him before. The king would never understand. He had chosen power over loyalty, corruption over truth. Aiden stepped back, standing tall and straight as the creature stood beside him, its massive form blocking the king's path. The room grew still, silent, the tension palpable. Aiden could feel the eyes of the courtiers upon him, their expressions a mix of fear, curiosity, and awe. They had never seen him like this, unbroken, resolute, and with a creature at his side that seemed to embody the very forces of nature itself. "It's not about power, Father," Aiden said, his voice steady and full of conviction. "It's about honor. It's about doing what is right. And what you've done, what you've allowed to happen, has to end." The king opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, Aiden raised his hand, silencing him. This time, it was not just Aiden speaking. It was the power of the bond between him and the creature, the force of their unity that filled the room. "Everything you've built is a lie," Aiden continued, his words carrying the weight of everything he had endured. "I've seen the truth in the wilderness. I've learned what real strength is. It's not about crushing your enemies or ruling with fear. It's about standing for something greater than yourself. And that's what I've come to do. I've come to take back what is mine, my honor, my kingdom, and my people." The king's face twisted in anger, but it was too late. The people could feel it. Aiden's words were not empty threats. They were a declaration, a promise to restore justice, a promise to set things right. The creature moved closer, its massive body casting a long shadow over the throne room. It let out a deep, rumbling growl, and the floor beneath them trembled with the sheer power of its presence. It was a warning. No one would stand in Aiden's way. Not now. Not ever again. The king took a step back, his bravado crumbling before Aiden's unwavering gaze. His reign had been built on lies, and he knew it. The kingdom that once revered him was now beginning to see through the facade. His power was built on fear, and fear was a fragile thing. It couldn't last forever. "Your reign ends now," Aiden said, his voice calm and final. The creature at his side echoed his words, its growl vibrating the air. A sudden realization seemed to hit the king. He had lost. There was no escaping the inevitable. He had failed, and now Aiden would take his place. "Please," the king pleaded, his voice faltering. "I never meant for this to happen. It was a mistake. Aiden, you're my son." "You were never a father to me," Aiden interrupted, his tone unwavering. "You were a king, and that was never enough." Without another word, Aiden turned to the courtiers, the nobles who had stood by and watched as he was cast aside, as the kingdom fell into corruption. They, too, had played their part in his exile. But no more. They had a choice to make now. "This kingdom will be ruled by truth," Aiden declared, his voice strong. "Not by fear. Not by lies. It's time for a new beginning." The creature at his side growled again, its low rumble reverberating through the hall. The king's reign had ended. His power was shattered. And Aiden had reclaimed what was rightfully his, not through violence, but through strength, truth, and the bond he had formed with the creature. The courtiers, one by one, began to lower their heads. Some, it seemed, had already begun to see the truth in Aiden's words. The whispers of discontent had been growing for some time, And now they had a leader, someone who would restore the kingdom to its former glory, someone who would bring justice. The king's face turned pale as the last of his supporters withdrew, leaving him alone with Aiden and the creature. In that moment, it was clear. Aiden had won. Not with force, not with violence, but with the strength of his spirit and the unshakable bond he shared with the creature. Aiden turned to face the throne one final time, the creature at his side, and for the first time in years, he felt a sense of peace. The kingdom was no longer a place of betrayal and power struggles. It was a place of hope, a place where justice would reign. The creature let out a final, triumphant roar, and Aiden stood tall, ready to lead the kingdom into a new era, one where loyalty, honor, and strength would be the true rulers.